Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Writers Chat. We are so glad you're with us, whether you're here in the community with us today or you're watching the replay. If you are watching the replay, I do want to invite you to join our Writers Chat Facebook group or to check out our Writers Chat page where you'll see all of our past episodes. I'm Johnny Alexander. I'm joined today by co-host Melissa Stroh and Brandy Bro, and our very special guest, Jim Watkins. Very happy to have Jim with us today. I met Jim about 15 years ago at the Florida Christian Writers Conference. He was one of the instructors, and I was a newbie who had no idea what I was doing. And he was one of those people who was just very authentic and genuine and warm and comforting to all of us newbies and made us feel so welcome and not stupid.
Done my job. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Johnny.
Well, it's true. I mean, because you are so nervous and there's just, all this stuff going on, you don't know. And he was someone as I went back to the conference year after year, I always wanted to talk to Jim. I am going to tell you about his bio. He's an award-winning author and speaker. He's 70 years old, although he prefers to think of himself as 30 with 40 years experience. I love that. His latest book, If You're Not Dead, You're Not Done, reveals 10 characteristics that lead to living a life of passion, purpose, and pizzazz. He began his career speaking with teenagers, but now provides his hope and humor for senior citizens, The Circle of Life. He's the author of 20 traditionally published books and over 2,500 articles in national magazines, as well as a popular speaker across the United States and overseas. And best of all, he has 8 adorable grandchildren. I've had the privilege of hearing Jim speak at the Blue Ridge Christian Writers Conference, at the Mid-South Christian Writers Conference. He is a wonderful speaker. Not only does he write about humor, though, he also writes very serious works. I read your book, and now I'm not going to remember the name of it, but the devotional book that you wrote, updating, who was it? Kempis, is that right?
Oh, Thomas à Kempis's Imitation of Christ. Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. So that was a very, very special devotional book. So Jim, we're going to turn it over to you to talk to us today about writing humor.
Okay. I didn't know exactly what the format was, whether it was a talk or question and answer. So we'll just do a little bit of both.
Okay. Yeah, we like to wing it around here.
Okay. All right. First of all, I want to tell you that I'm a firm believer in using humor in our writing. There's been nearly 100 university studies that shows that humor is effective and a great way to communicate. The first thing is that humor attracts all type of persuasive messages. So just a second here. Humor dramatically increases likability, but not necessarily credibility. So we love the class clown, but we may not vote for the clown for president. Maybe that's a bad example. Humor increases comprehension and education. They did a study where they were teaching a class called Introduction to Statistics. That is a snooze fest right there. And so 2 researchers set up this experiment. They had one teacher, had the same textbook, but in one of the classes, he used relevant humor. And in the other class, he just taught it straight. What they found was the class that used relevant humor had 10% higher grades. I'm not exactly sure what relevant humor is for a class on statistics. People's walking in the car, how many statisticians does it take to screw in a light bulb? The zeros 8 plus 1. But here's the result: 10% had higher grades with the class that used humor. And so what they found is that humor increases your attention, it increases your comprehension, increases retention, and whether it actually persuades or leads to action, that's kind of an iffy thing. So for 15 years, I was a columnist for 3 newspapers, and I always start out my column with humor. Probably 90% of the content was kind of Dave Barry type humor. And then I'd make a serious point. That used up about 5%. And then I'd return to the humor for a closing zinger. But I did find that it was just very, very persuasive. During that time, I was writing during the Clinton impeachment. I think we had the Iran war going on. It was kind of a serious time. It was a wonderful time to provide some humor for the readers. And one of the things humor does is it lowers our defenses. We may come into an issue and our arguments are all primed and ready to go. But if there's a type of humor in the delivery, it tends to lower our defenses. And so that's one thing I've found in speaking, is it really does lower the defenses, and it gives us that sense of camaraderie. Proverbs 17:22 teaches a cheerful heart is a good medicine. And then Job 8:21, which is a very depressive book, but right in the middle in chapter 8, it says, God will yet fill your mouth with laughter. And so that's part of the joy we have as Christians, is that we have a holy humor. G.K. Chesterton, a wonderful journalist, humorist, Christian, he said, I am all in favor of laughing. Laughing has something in it in common with the ancient words of faith and inspiration. It unfreezes pride and unwinds secrecy. It makes men forget themselves in the presence of something greater than themselves. And when someone scolded Charles Spurgeon for using humor in his sermons, he was a great orator during the 1800s. Here was his response to people who complained about him using humor. He says, this preacher think it less a crime to cause a momentary laughter than a half hour of profound slumber. And you may have been in those services as well. But our strongest example of using humor in our writing, in our speaking, in our communication, is none other than Jesus Christ himself. Jesus was a stand-up comic. Now let me explain that. The hip humor in first century Palestine was actually hyperbole, which is the intentional exaggeration of something. So when Jesus spoke about people who strain out gnats and swallow camels, he was using hyperbole and talking about things we could only do with CGI right now. But here's this Pharisees meticulously straining out the gnats, and then he swallows this entire camel. When Jesus spoke about having a speck in your eye, or looking at the speck of someone else's eye, while you had a log in your eye, again, he's using hyperbole, probably had him rolling on the hillsides. And ridiculous situations are always good for a laugh. And so Jesus talked about a camel going through the eye of a needle. Now, some pastors have absolutely ruined that for us. They said, now, you know, the eye of a needle was this gate in the wall of Jerusalem. And so for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, it had to first unburden all of its baggage. And you too need to unbaggage your life and get rid of all that excess. And then the camel had to get down on his knees, just like you need to get down on your knees to get through the eye of a needle. No, Jesus is talking about literally shoving a camel through the eye of a needle. And that's why his disciples say, well, Master, that is impossible. And Jesus says, with man, it's impossible, but with God, all things are possible. He also talked about lamps under beds, which in our culture doesn't sound that funny either. But you have to remember that a bed in first century Palestine was a flat, dry grass mat, and a lamp was an open flame. So how long are you going to hide an open flame under a flat, dry grass mat? Woof, up it goes. And so Jesus used humor. And so with the permission of Spurgeon, of Chesterton, and even Jesus Christ, let me just share 20 ways you can use humor in your writing. And you may say, well, I'm not funny. But here's some ways that anybody can use humor and, again, become have your audience become more attentive, comprehensive, retain the information. The first one is anecdotes, funny stories. Irma Bombach was the queen of anecdotal humor. Also Dave Barry, Garrison Keillor, Gene Shepard, who wrote A Christmas Story. Here's my attempt at anecdotal humor. It's called the papoose-driven life. The papoose-driven life. I consider myself a purpose-driven person. I've got a mission statement, an organizer with a calendar, a to-do list with goals and projects, plus pretty good self-discipline to pull it all off. But when Lois and I babysit our 3-month-old granddaughter Hannah each Tuesday, forget anything about purpose-driven. The day is papoose-driven. Grandma is not a morning person, so I'm in charge of Hannah the first part of the day. Did I say in charge of Hannah? How delusional. No, the papoose is the chief in the tribe. Occasionally she's asleep when Faith brings her by the house on her way to work, so I'm able to get some office work done as she sleeps in her car seat by my bookcases. But once Princess Hannah lets out a war cry, it's time to concentrate on her demands and not my deadlines. I was in the middle of this very column when Hannah awoke and launched into her infamous WMDs, weapon grade messy diaper. I'd almost forgotten how the miracle of parenting and now grandparenting makes one immune to the normal revulsion of pooping and puking. Don't put me near someone else's little pooping and puking papoose, but it doesn't bother me too much when the perpetrator is part of my blood and flesh. When she has clean diapers, it's time for breakfast and the floor show while the milk is heating. Hannah looks at me like I've completely lost my mind when I break into my homemade parody of Barry Manilow's Copacabana. Her name is Hannah from Indiana, the cutest girl north of Havana. Yes, it's Hannah from Indiana. In her cabana, she's eating bananas. Yes, it's Hannah Spalding. And she gives me that look, even at 3 months, that her mother used to give me, like, oh, you are so, so weird. But it keeps her preoccupied while I'm warming up her milk to the proper temperature. I watch Good Morning America while Hannah enjoys her bottle, but I know my power to determine the programs we will watch will soon come to an end. Before I know it, we'll be watching Teletubbies and Barney, because again, it's a papoose-driven life. I love you, you love me, I've lost all my sanity, I'm losing girls, I'm Barney. Ooh. That is a half-hour playtime under her new mobile of colorful plastic fish and an octopus that makes underwater sounds and electronic music. I love it when she smiles and laughs and squeals with joy as Papa entertains her. But when this ceases to be entertaining, Hannah suddenly suggests it's time to go out back to the porch swing by letting out a blood-curdling war cry and turning as red as a drugstore Indian. We swing and swing and swing some more until she's back to sleep and I once again can become a purpose-driven person. Right now, I'm typing this paragraph while rocking her car seat with my foot. As long as I can sit just right so the office chair doesn't squeak and keep my foot from moving, I may just have time to finish this column. Let the record show I love my granddaughter and I'm grateful to be able to babysit her once a week. I've also had to adjust my purpose-driven perspective to a papoose-driven mindset. On Survivor, the tribe may speak, but in the real world, the little squawking squaw has the final decisions. I'm just thankful Hannah goes home to her own teepee during the night. But there is purpose in that papoose-driven stage to allow my daughter and son-in-law to use their talents and passions in social work and law enforcement. To have the privilege of influencing this precious little person to make her laugh with silly songs. I need to find some more words that rhyme with Hannah, though, and to let her know she is loved unconditionally, even if she's turning red and launching those WMDs. And that is a much greater purpose than writing this silly newspaper column. So anecdotes, just take something that everyone can relate to and add some humor to that. Another thing we can do if you're taking notes, number 2 is paired phrases or words. And so for this to be effective, the pair has to be parallel and equal in grammar and structure. For instance, you see paired phrases most in a lot of serious literature. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Green pastures, still waters. What a witty fool, better a witty fool than a foolish wit. That's from William Shakespeare. Again, witty fool, foolish wit. And ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Of course, that's President John F. Kennedy. And when guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. That's the National Rifle Association. So you can use that type of thing. It's very popular in literature, and use it for your humor. Here's some examples I just really love. It's difficult to act youthful without acting childish. She doesn't just throw herself at him, she was taking careful aim. So paired phrases there. Number 3 are understatements and overstatements. Mark Twain said, get your facts right first, and then you can always distort them as much as you please. And as a side note, I probably do as much research on my humor columns as I do my nonfiction books, because for humor to be taken seriously, it's got to be based in real life. Or as Will Rogers noted, I don't make jokes. I just watch the government and report on the facts. Sid Caesar, who pioneered TV sketch comedy, observed, comedy is just the truth with a curlicue. My friend Rhonda Ray is a wonderful humorist. She's written some hilarious forewords for my books. One of them is called Squeezing Good Out of Bad, but here's an example of her exaggerated anecdote for a book that has a large lemon on the front, and it's called Squeezing Good Out of Bad. Have you ever lost track of a container or two in the deep recesses of your refrigerator? Okay, that's true, that's fact. Now we're gonna have some fun with it. Just today, I found a lemon in the refrigerator that had grown legs. I didn't even touch that one. Once they're past the tadpole stage, I try not to make them angry. Sometimes before the lemon starts to walk upright, however, I knew I had no choice but to wage war against the beast and its assorted fuzzy and furry friends in the fridge. So exaggeration or overstatement. Just the opposite can be equally funny. The English and my dad have mastered the understatement. One of the survivors of the German bombings of London described it as rather unpleasant. That's an understatement. Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the Black Knight, has had both of his arms and legs severed in a duel, and he defiantly declares, it's simply a flesh wound. So understatement is a great way to provide humor. Number 5, if you're keeping score, is relatability. And this one you have to keep your mind on who your target audience is. Their age, their gender, their socioeconomic status, region, politics. For instance, how many of you have ever been on a cruise and took pictures of your towels? Anybody do that? Okay. If you've been on a cruise, you know that they come in to clean the room and they turn them into fantastical origami creatures. Like we came back and there was a bunny rabbit wearing my sunglasses. But that would not work if you hadn't been on a cruise. So you've got to choose your relatability very closely. So know your audience. I was shocked when I was teaching at Taylor University. I mentioned, well, you know, 9/11. No, they weren't even born when the terrorists ran into the World Trade Center. So if you're going to be relevant to your audience, make sure you know your audience. One thing that Will Rogers was famous for is simply number 6, the simple truth. Although Will Rogers died in 1935, his commentary is still incredibly relevant. Here are some of his classic lines. A fool and his money are soon elected. Alexander Hamilton started the US Treasury with nothing, and that was the closest our country has ever been to being even. And the only difference between death and taxes, that taxing doesn't get worse every time Congress meets. And finally, George Bernard Shaw says, my way of joking is to tell the truth. It's the funniest joke in the world. I have one, and I should have put this on the screen, but here's my riddle. What is the difference between a pub and a pub board? What is the difference between a pub and a pub board? Drunken Englishmen in pubs make better decisions than pub boards. And so if you've ever dealt with a pub board, you know what I mean. For instance, this is real quick, not on the notes, but when Steve Lobby was working at Bethel, he's now, or Bethany House, he's now an agent, but he took my book on death for teenagers to pub board Tuesday was the Columbine shootings in Colorado. Thursday, he takes a book on death for teenagers to the pub board. And they reply, I quote, I don't think teens are interested in death. Okay. So what's the difference between a pub and a pub board? Drunken Englishmen make better decisions. So just the simple truth. Number 7 are play on words. And probably 50% of our humor relies on plays on words, which is perfect for writers who are actually sit-down comics. And so there's a double entendre. It's ambiguous words or phrases that allow for a double interpretation of the words. George Carlin said, the patient refused the transplant, saying he'd had a change of heart. Single entendre, I suppose the opposite of a double entendre would be that. So here are some single entendres that show the ambiguity. About time for my nap. My mind is getting a little fuzzy here. Stephen Wright is the best at this. He says, why do you park in driveways and drive on parkways? Rodney Dangerfield says, my wife went window shopping yesterday and came home with 7 windows. And Benjamin Driscoll, someone gave him a book to review, and he says, thank you for sending me a copy of your book. I shall waste no time reading it. Also, oxymorons fit into this category. Name comes from the 2 Greek words for sharp and dull. And so some of my favorite oxymorons are resident alien, airplane food, government intelligence, sanitary landfill, legally drunk, political science, pretty ugly, and Microsoft Works. So oxymoron phrases can also be a great source of humor. Some people say I'm superficial, but that's just on the surface. And if there's one thing I can't stand, it's intolerance. Prejudiced people are all alike. So double and single entendres. Puns are also great. They can be tricky, though. There was one editor in the Christian circuit. We called him the Punisher because his puns were just so awful. But apparently puns are actually brilliant. Most of the time, puns are only about 66% there. They are simply PU. You can decide whether these are pun-liners or actually punny. A bicycle can't stand alone, it is too tired. A will is a dead giveaway. If you don't pay your exorcist, you will get repossessed. Those who are too big for their britches will be exposed in the end. And homonyms also fit into this category. I tell people if I were any more transparent, I'd be a pain. And it only works in writing when you do that because pain is P-A-N-E in that case. So puns are a great way to have fun with words. Probably one of the best kinds of humors you'll see the most as you're watching comics or listening to your pastor try to tell a joke are reverses. And so this technique takes the reader speeding in one direction, and then you suddenly make this 180-degree turn. It's kind of the tilt-a-whirl of comedy. And for instance, here are some of my own favorites. I wrote a column called New Slogans for Old Boomers. When the going gets tough, the tough call a urologist. Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you feel completely out of your mind. Got milk of magnesia. A mind is a terrible thing to lose. And Phyllis Diller says, never go to bed mad, stay up and fight. So reverses. And then Joel Bolster has a great one. He says, I have a job at the radio station. I get in my car at rush hour and report on helicopter traffic. So a reverse. Number 9s are takeoffs. They are great fun too. They're similar to reverses, but they don't make that 180-degree turn. And so here are my latest entries in the 2020 Watkins Church Dictionary. Church growth, side effect of too many carry-in dinners. Dementalist, a believer who's lost the fun in his or her faith. McMessage, entertaining sermon with little nutritional value. television. Special revelation giving to a TV evangelist when contributions fall below budget projections. And two-timers, parishioners who only attend at church and Easter. And righteousness, self-righteous attitude of authors who see the speck of dust in their brother's eyes but have, oops, maybe a bad idea. So takeoffs are great fun. Just take something and just go a whole different direction from it. Number 10 are associations. One of my favorite types of humor. You put together two activities that are not usually associated with one another to create a plausible but a humorous situation. For instance, what if the Bible had been written on Twitter? What if you could only use 140 characters to tell Bible stories? So here are some entries from my Twitter Bible. Feeling really bad, must have been something we ate, Adam and Eve. Dream isn't working out exactly as I planned, Joseph. Facing giant, too big to hit, Saul. Facing giant, too big to miss, David. Nothing interesting happens around here. Think I'll relax in the tub, Bathsheba. 1,000 wives, I'm beginning to question my wisdom, Solomon. Just found out that Elizabeth and I are going to be first-time parents in our old age. I'm speechless, Zechariah. I haven't felt my baby kick, but sometimes it feels like he's walking on water. Herod's wife wants my head. I'm sure it's just a figure of speech, John the Baptist. And the best one ever, follow me, and just not on Twitter, Jesus. So just associations, have fun with that. Take something normal, add something, another thing normal, but when you put it together, hilarity pursues. So others are called, number 11 is non sequiturs. And that's an illogical statement, which is humorous just because of the juxtapositioning of two elements. Classic Groucho Marx famous line, I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How he got in my pajamas, I'll never know. Yogi Berra, catcher for the Yankees, was a major league master of the non sequitur. And the jury is out on whether he intended to say these or he just had the greatest malaprops. But here are some of Yogi Berra's famous lines. I never said most of the things I said. Half the lies they tell about me aren't true. 90% of this game is half mental. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. If you don't know where you're going, you might wind up someplace else. And finally, the future isn't what it used to be. So you're taking, it's just silliness is what a non sequitur is. A little more sophisticated humor would be satire. And we get that word from the Greek from around 500 BC. There were people called satires or satiric dramas. And these comedies featured men dressed as the top half of a human and the bottom half of a goat or horse. And they would come out and do these really bawdy, explicit comedy routines in between the tragedies like Euripides, where everyone was dead by the end of the curtain call. And so in these full-length dramas, tragedies, they would bring in the satires to provide some comedy relief. And so the Romans developed their own brand of satire around 65 BC. You won't be tested on any of this, so you don't have to remember all this, but it's the Latin word for satura, which means literally a dish of mixed fruit. And so rather than sketches, the Roman satire tended to be short verses attacking people or situations with a ridicule or parody. The half goat, half man is a good metaphor because you take a real situation, that's the man, and a goat, yeah, there really are goats, and you turn it into a comical situation by creating this person who's half a man, half a goat. For instance, here's a column I wrote during the impeachment trial of President Clinton. I called it The Sound of Monica. Our team of investigative humor columnists have discovered that backers are being sought for a Broadway musical inspired by the impeachment proceedings against the president. A reliable cleaning lady at an unidentified theater has provided us access to top secret lyrics for The Sound of Monica. A spokesperson for Rodgers and Hammerstein would neither confirm nor deny their involvement in this revision of their popular musical, saying only they're both dead. According to the sources, the show opens with Diane Sawyer dancing on top of the hill as she sings, "The hill is alive with the word impeachment, a song it is sung only twice before. The hill is alive with the word impeachment, but most of the country is already bored of Lewinsky and Tripp and their late night chats and the jury's sleazy details. Polls show that 60% couldn't care if the law and real justice prevails." Then Ken Starr allegedly sings his version of My Favorite Things. Wiretap subpoenas and stained dark blue dresses, grand juries, inquiries, stolen caresses, news leaks that spread like the Black Plague with wings. These are a few of my favorite things. Our source has also produced the lead sheets to Climb Every Mountain of Evidence, sung by a chorus of White House lawyers. Mount every defense, cop every plea, answer every question with vague legalese. A case that will try our ideals of justice, a case to be won by the likes of just us. According to our source, no one has been found to sing the original song, I Must Have Done Something Good. Also, the decision to sing So Long Farewell in the final scene has not yet been made. Will it be the president, the first lady, the lawyers, the media, the entire Congress? Critics who have been leaked copies of the script have panned the production because of its unfinished and sure to be unsatisfying ending. Unlike the original score, there are no clear-cut winners, the good nuns, or losers, the bad Nazis. But perhaps that is closer to real life than the theater. No one wins war. One side simply loses less. And as the battle on the Hill escalates, there will be no winners either. The president, the Congress, the media, the voters are all losers in this long-running production that continues in Washington. So let's all sing, I simply remember my favorite things, and then I don't feel so bad. Or better yet, pray for our president, the Congress, those disillusioned by the scandal, and especially for that woman, Miss Lewinsky. So in that one, it's 90%, probably 99%, pure humor, and only has one line that really drives the point home. And that would be, or better yet, pray for our president, the Congress, those disillusioned by the scandal, especially for Monica Lewinsky. So parodies are great fun. Take something that's absolutely normal and just mock it mercilessly. Number 13 are absurdities. This genre begins with a logical premise and then it adds the absurdities. And probably the best example of this is I Love Lucy episodes. Just a fun fact, I live in Marion, Indiana, and that's where the writer of I Love Lucy lived and wrote the script. She would fly out to LA once a week and present it to the table reading, and then would fly back to Marion. So we have her as one of our famous people from Indiana. But anyway, what she would do is take a logical premise and then add Lucy and Ethel's absurdities. And Lucy always wants into Ricky's nightclub act or wants to make some extra money. And so once the writer had a plausible foundation, they added the disguises, working in the chocolate factory, becoming a spokesperson for Vita Mita Vegemin. Remember that? Vita Mita Vegemin, and it's feisty too. It must have been 100% alcohol, but it's an example of taking something normal and just adding the absurdity to it. And so here's an example of absurdity. This was during the time the Da Vinci Code was coming out. And so I decided that we needed to have the whoopee cushion code. The Bible is filled with hidden humor. That's a contention of Dr. Harry Tick, a para-archaeologist who claims to have discovered the whoopee cushion code. Written on a tanned sheep bladder, thought to be the world's first novelty item, the ancient writing fills in the gaps of biblical history with holy humor. For instance, the document reveals that it was Abraham speaking to Pharaoh who first uttered the classic line, "Take my wife, please." Tick's discoveries are somewhat controversial, however, replacing the 10 plagues of Egypt with his list of top 10 practical jokes of all time, including fake blood, rubber snakes, and wind-up frogs. Of course, the Hebrews were the inventors of the dribble flask, clay doo-doo, and manna that turned your mouth blue. Tick also claims to have decoded Moses' long-lost opening to his great speech at Mount Sinai. Good speakers always begin with a great joke. Hey, how's everybody doing tonight? Well, so far, so good. Hey, how about that Passover meal? Great menu if you have to be on the lamb. Oh, great room, tough room. I'm dying like the firstborn in Egypt here. Holy smoke, have I got some great news for you? Professor Tick also reveals that Abimelech was not killed by a millstone landing on his head, but by an Acme anvil. The secret inscriptions also reveal that angels use humor to ease their pronouncements. For instance, before the angels appeared to the shepherds, Gabriel opened with this, until now, undelivered monologue. Hey, I just flew in from heaven. Boy, my arm's tired. Hey, don't be sheepish. Flock right up here. You'll love the good news I have to share with you. In addition, the three wise men, Tick argues, were also accompanied by the three unwise men, Moshach, Larishach, and Shemp, who brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Whoopee Code reveals its most controversial claim of all. The rapture is actually a historical practical joke. Tick explains it's Can to Camera, America's Funniest Home Videos, and Punked all rolled into one. So again, you're taking a normal premise and just adding absurdity to it. This is something I'd really suggest, whether you're writing really serious stuff or funny stuff. Number 14 are triplets, and there is something magical or miraculous about using triplets. And so in serious and silly writings, I would suggest that you use triplets. Throughout the Bible, there are triplets. We have the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. That's my theory, is why threes are so important, because God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit are one, and they are the most important thing. But there was gold, frankincense, and myrrh. There is faith, hope, and love. Declaration of Independence has life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It just doesn't sound right to say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and universal health care. No, you need three. And so in humor, you also have the Three Stooges. You have a minister, a priest, and a rabbi who are always going into a bar. And triplets can also be used for longer pieces. And here's how those triplets work. First of all, there's preparation. You set up the situation. Anticipation is the triple. And then the punchline is the story payoff. Henny Youngman, most famous for his Take My Wife, Please, he offers a great triplet for humor. Preparation. Says, the reason my wife and I have been happily married for 40 years is because we go out to dinner once a week, excuse me. The reason my wife and I have been happily married for 40 years is because we go out to dinner once a week. Anticipation, some candlelight, some wine, some music. Okay, there's the triplet. And then the punchline, I go out on Friday night, she goes out on Saturday. So again, it's that triple punch. The famous, how many people does it take to change a light bulb, is also based on triplets. Here's the three-part formula. You have one to hold the ladder, one to screw in the bulb, and the punchline, and so many numbers to do what. So how many government employees does it take to change a light bulb? 52. One to hold a ladder, one to screw in the bulb, and 50 to draft the environmental impact study. So triplets are wonderful in that they work great in series, in a very serious work, and also for humor. So try to faith, hope, and love, all those wonderful triplets we find in the Bible. Use those in your writing as well. Number 15 is incongruity. And Jesus, again, had his people, his audience laughing with his incongruities. German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer wrote that humor resulted from surprise. It is the sudden perception of incongruity. And so here's an example of using incongruity for comic results that I've had published in several magazines. I've got a post on YouTube of it. I wanted to address the pro-life, pro-choice issue, and I knew that there were a lot of defenses that would come up from both sides. And so I need to put it in a humorous setting for them to get that sudden perception of incongruity. Here we go. It's called We're Pro-Choice. This past election season, we heard a lot about the importance of everyone having a right to choose. We too want to avoid legislating values and forcing moral absolutes upon our good citizens. Ethics is a personal choice, not a political or religious concern. And so that's why we've established planned bank robbery. Now, we personally don't approve of bank robbery, but we don't want to inflict our morals on anyone else either. It must be a personal decision for each individual. Education is the key, since we have discovered that 99% of senior high school teens do not know how banks are robbed. They don't know how to load a .357 Magnum, to drive a getaway car, or to demand, give me all your unmarked, non-sequentially ordered $20 bills. Young people need to know the wide range of career options available to them. We are also concerned that a lot of young people are robbing banks without proper protection. Yes, proper protection. Personal injury and irresponsibility are much greater crimes than actually knocking over First National Bank. At Planned Parenthood, we don't approve of unauthorized withdrawals, but we do want to offer, free of charge, bulletproof vests, ski masks, and if necessary, a reliable getaway car. This is the compassionate thing to do. And young people who need some extra cash from their local 7-Eleven shouldn't have to get their parents' permission to obtain this protection. If that were the case, hundreds more teens would be needlessly injured by narrow-minded parents who are trying to inflict their morality on their children. Now, again, let me emphasize, here at Planned Bank Robbery, we do not condone or encourage grand larceny. We only want to stress it is a personal choice. We're pro-choice. You take pro-choice into anything, it makes no sense. You don't want to get on an airplane with a pro-choice pilot. Well, I think I'll just go the way I want to go. I mean, there are decisions and consequences. And so we tried to, make that point. So incongruity is a wonderful way to get humor. Jesus was certainly pointing out the incongruities of the Pharisees. So that's number 15, incongruities. Number 16 are toppers. A topper is a follow-up joke based on the first joke. David Letterman quipped, "A woman called 911 because she ran out of cigarettes. You don't see me calling 911 because I've run out of jokes, do you?" Well, not anymore anyway. And this, the reader thinks the joke's done, but there's more to come. So that is a topper. Number 17 are funny words. Neil Simon's play The Sunshine Boy, Willie tells his nephew, 57 years in this business, you learn a few things. You know what words are funny and which words are not funny. Alka-Seltzer is funny. You can say Alka-Seltzer and you're going to laugh. Words with K in them are funny. Casey Stengel, that's a funny name. Robert Taylor, not funny. Cupcake is funny. Tomato is not funny. Cookie is funny. Cucumber is funny. Car keys, Cleveland. Cleveland is funny. Maryland, not funny. Then there's chicken. Chicken is funny. Pickle is funny. And he just goes on all these crazy things. But some words just are funny. Some of my favorite words are bloviate, which is to just be full of hot air. You see that every election year. Politicians are bloviating. I love that word. Crapulence is actually a word. And it means somebody is so full of themselves. Boy, he's got a serious case of crapulence. Mesopotamia, that's just a fun word to say. Pontificate. Zucchini. Zucchini cracks me up for some reason. So find funny words and use those in your writing. Number 18 are running gags or repetition. And these are jokes or humor bits that keep showing up through your talk or book. And it does tie the whole thing together. If you've been at one of my conferences where I did the one on I'm a Giant Killer, throughout that. That's the thing that when I point to you, you scream real loud and yell, "I'm a giant killer." But they're running gags that run through the entire book or through the entire article. Dave Barry is great with these. He always has in different columns alert leaders. That would make a great name for a rock band. I'm not making this up. He has Mr. Language Person that makes fun of grammar, and his annual Christmas shopping guide. So they're running jokes throughout his columns, throughout his career. We can use those in our humor as well. And so, like as you watch a comedy drama tonight, just keep in mind, you got your list there, go through it and say, oh, that was a reverse. Yeah, very clever. Or, oh, they're using this as a running gag tonight. Number 19 is self-deprecation. James Thurber says, the wit makes fun of other persons, the satirist makes fun of the world, the humorist makes fun of himself. And I like that. I do not want to be a cruel comic. I don't want to, be crude. Yeah, if you watch the Comedy Channel, you'll notice that humor is either rude, crude, or lewd. Those are the only three things they can do. If they're bombing, throw in an F-bomb. That'll help you. So if I'm going to make fun of somebody, I'll make fun of myself. Once, when Abraham Lincoln was accused of being two-faced, he replied, if I had two faces, would I be wearing this one? And two of my favorites that I've used in my columns, I'm so skinny, the doctor spanked my umbilical cord and tied me in a knot. And then I put, I've tried it, but I'm just no good at self-deprecation. Now, even Jesus taught self-deprecation, but those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So self-deprecation is great fun, and I've just got so much material. Every day I've got more material to make fun of myself. Number 20 is shock and obscenity. Write that down, number 20, shock and obscenity, and then cross it out. X it out, cross it out, because most humor today, as I said, is rude, crude, and lewd. And if you have to resort to profanity to get a laugh, you're not bleeping funny. And Paul writes, obscene stories, foolish talk, and coarse jokes, these are not for you. That's Ephesians 5:4. And then let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so you may know how to answer everyone. The Greek word there for salt can also mean wit or humor. So as we're sharing the gospel, we ought to share it with grace, of course, but we can add some humor to it, and to make it, as we said, people pay more attention, they retain things more. So here's my question. Will my writing, speaking your humor, draw people closer to Jesus or push them further away? And so I'm always self-censoring. I've had to let go of some of my funniest lines because they are not gracious. So I won't even give you an example. They were hilarious, but they were not gracious. And almost every time I give this talk, someone will say, they usually have a pocket protector full of engineering pens, but say, I'm just not funny. But I think funny, a sense of humor is definitely a sixth sense. It's not that I see dead people, but it's seeing things differently than other people. And so ask yourself some questions. What if this was bigger? What if this was smaller? What if this was upside down? What if this was inside out? What if it was visible? What if it was invisible? What if it were alive? What if the government took it over? What if it was made into a song? Just use questions like that to get your mind thinking just a little differently. Now, I want to give you some cautions, because humor is powerful. It really is. It gets attention, it gets comprehension, it gets retention, it changes lives. So number one caution, use humor to help, not hurt. Let me suggest humorists follow Hippocrates' oath that we do no harm. Again, be gracious. It's why you won't find any examples of obscene, racist, sexist, derogatory humor in my writing or speaking. And as a Christian who writes and speaks, I think my humor needs to redeem rather than demean. Number two, use humor to introduce or reinforce a point. Humor that is used simply to get your reader's attention or to keep them awake between points 9 and 10 merely distracts from the points you're trying to make. So make sure that when you have humor, it relates back to a point you're trying to make. There's one famous, I'll just say he smiles a lot, one famous TV preacher who always starts out with a horrible joke, a cringeworthy joke, and then goes off onto his talk. Well, if he would incorporate a funny story like that into the main point of his message, we would remember that rather than remembering that silly story. So make sure your humor is going to influence people to remember your main point. Number 3, use humor discreetly and tastefully. Let me give you an example of the worst possible joke I've ever heard. And this was emailed to me by a pastor friend. And please do not laugh at this. This is not funny. What do you call a woman with 2 black eyes? A slow learner. Oh, that grieved me because, sorry. In my church, my wife was pastor of a church, and I got to speak every other week. And I could look out into my congregation. I'm not sure why this is breaking me up. I could see women who were being physically abused. I could see a girl who was being sexually abused and was a part of the court system because of that. That was a cruel, cruel joke. So, just let me get myself together here. I've given this talk 100 times. That's never been like I did today. But make sure that you're using sensitivity. Know the edges of the envelope. Things I could write in my humor column for a secular newspaper probably were not good for the pulpit. And so I had to be very, very careful of how I chose my humor, keeping in mind my audience. For instance, I did one for the newspaper called If Women Created Viagra. They would create stuff like Cryagra. So when you take your significant other to the movies, you slip him one of these pills, and he's just crying all the way through the movie because there's Meg Ryan and there's Tom Hanks. They're coming together to this park. Oh, it's so touching. Or slip him a Fryagra on your way to work, and when you get home, you'll have a nicely cooked meal waiting for you. Probably not appropriate for church, but it got a lot of laughs in the secular newspaper column. Whatever you do, never, ever use racist, sexist, or ethnic humor. Now, this doesn't mean you can't use humor with sensitive subjects. I'd written a book for teens on sexuality. It was answering 2,500 teens' questions about sex and dating. And it sold well. So Kindle House offered a contract and a second book. And I didn't even write a proposal. It was just a verbal agreement. I got the contract, I signed it, I cashed the advance and spent it. And then my editor calls and says, I want you to have the same kind of humor you had in your book on sexuality. I said, Karen, we're writing about death. I know, but I know you can do it. Thanks. Clicks the phone. And I go, oh man, what am I going to do? I've signed this contract. I've spent the advance. How do you add humor to a book about death? So I began each chapter with relevant humor. For instance, for the chapter about the importance of acknowledging someone has died, it started out this way. No one seems to die in our culture. They're simply been called home, given up to ghosts, returned to the dust, gone the way of all mortal flesh, flown to their heavenly reward, crossed over Jordan, traveled on to glory, moved up to sing in the heavenly choir. The less religious are said to be on ice, 6 feet under, pushing up daisies, shoveling coal, their meters expired. They breathed their last, met the grim reaper, keeled over, bit the big one, kicked the bucket, bought the farm, cashed in their chips, shuffled off to Buffalo, brought down the final curtain, the fat lady has sung and Elvis has left the building. No, they're dead. And so I went on to say how important it is for us as we're grieving to use that word death. And we use so many euphemisms that we try to soften reality of losing a loved one. So, and it won a camp or a Christianity Today Book of the Year contest. So apparently it didn't offend too many people. So you can write on sensitive subjects, but again, you know your audience, know the edge of the envelope, and know your heart. That you are not being mean-spirited or being cruel. Okay, number 4, caution. As a teen, I decided to make homemade spaghetti sauce when my mom was in the hospital. This was before the days of Prego. And so I carefully added the tomato paste and the tomato sauce, and it called for a 1/4 cup of garlic. I'm not exactly Wolfgang Puck, or even that crazy chef with his Hell's Kitchen thing. I didn't realize that this recipe called for chopped garlic, so I put in a 1/4 cup of powdered garlic, and so we had bad breath for 2 weeks. And so you need to treat your humor as seasoning. Gingerly, ooh, there's a pun, gingerly season your manuscript with humor so it doesn't overpower what you're trying to say. Now, if you're writing just pure humor, go for it. But if you're using it like I do for most of my books, I want it sprinkled through it so it keeps you reading, keeps you laughing, but also the serious points get made. Here are some secrets of how you can be very humorous in your writing. Number 1, put the punchline last. Now, that I shouldn't have to say that, but sometimes I don't get that right. For instance, which is funnier, A, B, or C? None is not an option. So here's some action. This is an actual rewrite I did. A, I'm critically acclaimed, but commercially shamed since I've won awards, but never a spot on a New York Times bestseller list. B, my books have won awards, but never a spot on bestseller lists. I'm commercially ashamed, but critically acclaimed. Or number C, or letter C, my books have won awards, but never a spot on the bestseller list. I'm critically acclaimed, but commercially ashamed. So obviously it's C, because we're putting the punchline last, and even making sure it's last. B, I'm commercially ashamed, but critically acclaimed. Acclaim is not a funny way to end. That's a great way to end, acclaim. So I reworked that. I'm critically acclaimed, but commercially ashamed. That's the punchline right there. A gives away the punchline. B fails to put the funniest phrase at the very end. So C is a winner. Number 2, use details. Here's another pop quiz. I wrote a column on the terrible consequences of intolerance. So which paragraph is funny here, A or B? Again, none of the above is correct. A, for instance, do you really want to go to a tolerant doctor? I want a doctor who is narrow-minded and completely intolerant to disease. Okay, so that's A. B, for instance, do you really want to go to an open-minded doctor with signs in the waiting room that read, I break for bacteria, save the salmonella, and take a stand for polio? No, I want a doctor who is narrow-minded and completely intolerant of disease and physical afflictions when I'm told, turn your head and cough. So again, the secret is in the details, the posters, so what the doctor says. For instance, if you go home and, well, you are home, this is a Zoom. Okay, if your spouse or friend comes home tonight and you say something really funny happened, if you have to say, well, you had to be there, you have not given enough detail. So give enough detail that the reader is there and can catch that punchline. And then work on your timing. Timing is a secret to good stand-up comedy and good sit-down writing. So be sure you read your article aloud, or even better yet, have someone in your writing critique group write it aloud. That way you don't provide all of your funny voices and intonations and things like that. You are hearing it as your reader will hear it. And so listen closely for the timing. Did I take too long to set up that punchline? Did I rush in telling it? So timing. In our writing, even in our serious writing, we might have a sense of rhythm to it, so we hit that final point with a solid pound. Read other humorists, number 4. Some of my favorites are sprinkled throughout the book. Dave Barry is, you got to read him. Irma Bombeck, there's a wonderful tribute to her. Best columns is called Forever Irma. I would highly recommend that. Philip Gully does a hilarious job of talking about country churches. My friend Rhonda Ray, there's also the Babylon Bee, that's kind of a Christian version of The Onion. And then, of course, visit hopeandhumor.org, my website. And you can buy books. My Writing with Banana Peels, Principles, Practices, and Pratfalls of Writing Humor. We want to read that. Here's the final thing I want to say. Mary Hirsch has this final caution for us. Humor is a rubber sword. It allows you to make a point without drawing blood. Let me repeat that, sorry. Humor is a rubber sword. It allows you to make a point without drawing blood. So that's my time. I'm Jim Watkins. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask real quickly?
All right. Well, yeah, everybody, if you want to come back on, we did have one question way early up about,
sure.
As a new author, how do I pick and distinguish between my characters' unique senses of humor? So,
oh, that's interesting.
yeah, it's a good
Well,
question.
I would go through those 20 different types of humor. Maybe he's like my friend, the editor, who's just, I mean, he's absolutely brilliant, but his puns are absolutely awful. I mean, they're clever, but they're just groaners. So you could have someone whose puns are his type of humor, and he's annoying the way he uses them. And then you've got somebody who's always telling, unfunny jokes, or somebody who is a great storyteller, those type of things. But I would use, if these are like 5 characters, they have 5 different senses of humor, go through those 20 and assign 2 or 3 to each of them. And so as soon as you hear a bad pun, that's character number B, for instance. So
Yeah, that's really good, because I don't know that I've ever really thought about specifying senses of humor for different characters. So it's the way
I've never heard that either. That's a great idea.
it is a great idea to just kind of deepen them that way.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Leslie asks, how do you stay filled in the spirit, because the humor can be everyone's medicine, but then there is no one filling you up to keep doing it?
Could you read that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, typos. How do you stay filled in the spirit, because the humor can be everyone's medicine, but then there is no one filling you up to keep doing it, to keep doing the humor? Leslie, are you on here, baby?
Yeah.
Yeah, please explain.
For an understanding, just in my family is an example. I've always been like my dad, always been the humorist, always being the one cracking jokes, and it can be very depleting, because then everybody expects that of you. So you have to constantly keep filling up your spirit to keep being that life that you're giving. But then you're not always receiving. And I know the Lord's resources are infinite, but sometimes you just feel like, okay, does anybody give back? So it's hard. And I often wonder how pastors can do it, because pastors have to keep giving, in their sermons, but how do they replenish? So that's the thing. How do you replenish your spirit when you're constantly giving?
I replenish mine by reading humor books, by watching sitcoms that really have clever humor. A lot of sitcoms are just, as far as I'm concerned, just dumb. And especially the Disney Channel, those sitcoms are just lame. But I look for comedy shows that really have my sense of humor, I guess, is more dry, more, I don't know if you call it sophisticated, but it's a little higher type of humor. And so I try to watch those shows, and I get lots of good ideas. Fortunately, I've got a lot of funny people that I email back and forth with, and they keep me laughing. So I think it's, yes, it's part of the Holy Spirit, keeping you on the cutting edge and open to what God has, but it's also listening to a lot of other people and getting their ideas and learning little bits from them, how you can use that. So I think you've got to be reading as much as you're writing. And so be reading humor as much as you're writing it, or be listening to humor as much as you're writing it. So you're constantly filling up that well, which is easily to deplete. It really is.
Yeah.
I think it's also having a nice support system, a personal support system for maybe
Mhm.
one or two or a small group of friends that you can just talk about and laugh about the
Right.
difficult things with.
Exactly. Yep.
Johnny, you're muted, sweetie.
I know, and I couldn't unmute it. I was trying to unmute and it wouldn't go. Pam, did you have your hand up?
Do I have any handouts?
Okay. No, hand
No.
up. She asked if she had her hand up.
Yeah, no. Brandy, you'll get this. A lot of us get this, like with real life, having to laugh at real life, laughing at things that, do you ever like laugh at things that in the beginning are serious, but
Oh,
then
yeah.
later on, you find the humor in it? I mean, we have had in the last almost 31 years with Anna,
Mhm.
who was sick from the time she was a couple months old on, and, you know, special needs and all the
Right.
emergencies and things and all. There are sometimes when something will happen and it shouldn't be funny, and Daryl and I start laughing.
Mhm.
It's almost like a relief. But then here's an example of this. Now this is funny though. I got a devotion accepted back for Christian Broadcasting Network, and I was like, woohoo! They've hit the big time. They took my Devo about Anna, CBN.com. This is like huge thing. And I'm feeling great. And I'm praising God and thank you, Lord. And Anna pooped herself. So I'm cleaning her up, right, Kate? 30 years old. There's a whole lot of honking poop in that girl's intestines. I can't even begin to tell you how much. And I'm cleaning her up, got her all washed up, cleaned up. I'm starting to wipe it off the toilet because I have to sit her down in case she has a seizure, you know, get her cleaned up. And then I started to laugh and I'm like, oh, okay. You're feeling pretty darn good because you just got a Devo accepted by CBN and here you are cleaning poop up off the toilet. And I
Exactly.
laughed at myself so hard because that's not as serious, but there's been times where just really some things
Yeah.
later on, or they just get really funny in the retelling.
Yeah. One of
But-
my most popular columns was everyone needs a kidney stone. And if you've ever had a kidney stone, it is the worst. I've talked to women who've had eight hours of back labor, and they say they'll still take that over a kidney stone.
Wow.
And so it just was excruciating. But a couple of years later, I started looking back at all the hilarious things that ensued because of that, and how it has totally changed my mind that if something bad happens, I go, hey, sure beats a kidney stone. And it's just kind of changed my entire perspective. So yeah, I think there is a coping mechanism. When I first found out I had cancer, first thing I did for my newspaper column was write 10 great things about having cancer. Nobody asked you to move. Nobody asked you to volunteer at church. Suddenly everybody's praying for you. You know, and it was just, then there was some silly things too. That's just kind of my coping mechanism because it is a good medicine. And to me, Romans 8:28 is the ultimate that's good, that's bad joke. You know, all things do work to his glory, as purpose, if we love him, are called to his purpose. And to me, that's the greatest punchline of all. That God can take the worst, and whatever it is, he redeems it for good. Not that it was good, but he redeems it for good. He is so funny.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and close up so we can stop the recording. Jim, you're
All
welcome
right.
to stay. We do have an after party. If you're able to stay, you can do that.
My phone has been blowing up. I think I've got a Zoom meeting at 12, so maybe I better
then you're
jump off here. So, sorry.
All right, well, you can
Thanks
go.
a lot.
You go. Thank
Thank
you
you, Jim.
Good being with you. Bye-bye.
so much. It was great. For everybody else, next week, Dan Walsh is going to be here with us to talk about indie publishing. Dan started out his writing career with Ravel, writing stories, and now he's got his self-publishing career going on, and he's going to talk to us about how to do that and how he's been successful with that, so we can get some tips. So again, we're glad you're here. Come back, be with us next week. Bye-bye, everybody.